Greetings, my name is Pete Ring. My background is in military aviation and in particular fighters and choppers. I do these chats on behalf of Air Force Association New South Wales and on behalf of Wings magazine and also for our Wings Australia YouTube channel. Could I also ask that if you like our videos, then please subscribe to our channel and have a look at the description on our channel for this video, and you'll find links to subscribing to our magazine called Wings and subscribing to Air Force Association New South Wales. I'm pleased today to be able to talk to Air Vice Marshal retired Dave Rogers AM, who was a member of an Air Force contingent that operated out of Ubon, Ratchathani in Thailand during the Vietnam War. It was involved with the Vietnam War, but not directly. Dave, welcome.
Thanks, Pete.
What were we doing in Ubon?
Well, I guess it goes back into early 1962 when the North Vietnamese and the Pathet Lao, the communist forces, were coming down through Laos, and the Thai government were quite worried about their border. Thailand being a member of SEATO, which Australia was with other 6 countries, a request was put from SEATO down to Australia for some forces to assist and perhaps repel any air invasions, because the Thai Air Force was concentrated around Bangkok, and they asked the SEATO partners if they would assist. The US came in with 2 squadrons. They had one over at Tark Lee. They had an F-102 squadron down at Karat. The Brits put 10 hunters up at Chiang Mai, and Australia responded with a request for sabres at Ubon and over in the northeast corner, north of the Cambodian border. So there was very, very short notice given. 77 Squadron in Butterworth was given the task, and there were a few political sensitivities about it, mainly because Malaysia wasn't a member of SEATO at the time. And the government decided to deploy the aeroplanes. They were given about 3 or 4 days' notice, and Wing Commander John Huddle, who was then the CO of 77, put the force together. There were some people sent up from Australia to form a little bit of a nucleus of a base squadron, but there were 10 sabres left Butterworth, flew down to Singapore because of the sensitivity with Malaysia, and they left Singapore for Bangkok. The 2 serviceable sabres were left behind. The other 8 went straight up to Bangkok, and after all the welcomes and festivities there, they stayed overnight, and then they flew up to Ubon. Well, right. When they got there, there was just a 7,000-foot strip, and that was all, with a few taxiways. And 5 ACS, the Airfield Construction Squadron, had been up there, but there weren't any facilities. They'd put a tent city up. So for about 5 to 6 months, the guys lived in tents. They were operating the squadrons out of tents. The 5 ACS then, over the next 9 months, developed and built a camp over the eastern side of the runway. And when they arrived there, they were put onto alert because of any possible incursions from any forces coming over the border from Laos. There was about 160 Americans there at the time for a radar site, which was just a little bit west of the base. The radar was an air defence radar called Lion, which was there for many years. And in the first couple of weeks, there were some sort of scrambles on, put it this way, unusual but unknown intruders, which turned out to be false, but nevertheless it settled in, and there was quite a little bit of tense activity. But the squadrons settled down into the to the routine and started to do the usual Australian thing of building up our own capabilities and little things we had around the place. With 5 ACS, built the camp over the other side of the runway, as I said, and they did a superb job. And the actual, strangely enough, that little camp that was built at Ubon was the nucleus of what we have in the Air Force today in terms of having one kitchen with 3 wings for the airmen, sergeants and officers. we had that set up there, which is quite interesting. But initially there was just 79 Squadron, which was when the aircraft arrived in Bangkok en route. It was renamed 79. It went up there to Ubon, and with about, I think around about another 40 people came up from Australia initially as part of the setup for a base squadron facility, which over the years built to around about 170 people, including 79 Squadron, which came from the Sabre stock at Butterworth.
And what date was this again?
That was June 62. They arrived there on the 1st of June 1962.
How long did we stay there?
The squadron left in 1968. It sort of the operations were there. The Americans started to move in 65 and really took over the base because of their association involvement in the Vietnam War. And slowly Australia's sort of contribution diminished a little bit. And then in 1965, we had 2 aircraft placed on alert. We were sitting on alert on alert 5 from 6 in the morning till 6 to dark.
What did alert 5 mean?
That means that the guys are sitting all dressed up in their gear. The aircraft are out there all armed up and the switches in the right position. So if there's something detected on the radar, they'll press the button and the alert. So you got to run out to the aeroplane, hop in, jump in the cockpit, strap in, press the start button and go. So everything's ready to go.
Okay, good. Yeah. And so how did we're sitting in quite a remote airfield from what I understand, and we've got now a good little infrastructure built up and the force is working well. How did we do major servicing and that on Sabres?
Well, when the setup, by the time it matured at the end of 1962, in other words, the camp was built and we had a hangar built, because 5 ACS did that as well. We only did servicing up to what they call the sea servicing, which in common sense parlance is like a grease and oil change. You could do some modifications or some pull the tail off and put it back on again, but no major servicings. For that, the aircraft were rotated from Butterworth, and it was because of the sensitivity again with Malaysia, it was classified secret. Now, originally the ferries, the way it was done was that 2 Sabres would leave Butterworth with a Canberra, and they would fly with the Canberra, which would do all the navigation, and closing towards Bangkok, the Sabres would sit underneath the Canberra's wing, and at the same time, 2 Sabres would leave Ubon and go down to Karat, so that there would be an RV over Karat. The Canberra would come in with the 2 Sabres underneath. He'd do an orbit. The 2 from Butterworth would join on, and the 2 from Butterworth would fall off and go to Ubon, and the Canberra would go back to Butterworth. And it was called a Sabre move. Everybody knew what it was all about, and even the Armars who worked for the guys in the Married Quarter saying, "Oh, when's Massa going up to Butterworth?" So they changed it to, the code name was Freight Move. I don't think it achieved very much, but that was the way. So the aircraft came back to Butterworth to 478 for major servicings.
Okay, so that move of the Sabres was all done in radio silence, except for the 2 that took out of
very much so, yeah.
And the 2 that went into Ubon took over the call sign.
Yeah, the Canberra did all the talking. So the Sabres were just sitting there, and the others did the radar. It was like an intercept was directed from Lion, did the intercept on the Canberra and just the changeover. But there were a couple of times when the Canberra, when there was nothing sort of, it worked out as planned, and the Canberra declared an emergency with an oxygen, so he had diverted into Ubon. So he would come into Ubon with the 2 Sabres, and he'd depart with the other 2.
Good one.
That happened about 4 or 5 times, but it was, I guess initially was quite sensitive, but developed into a little bit of a circus after a while.
Yeah, the best laid secrecy plans go astray mostly, and everyone knows.
Yeah, very much so, Peter. Very much so.
That's interesting. So we were flying 6 aircraft out of there, doing various tasks, including intercepting anything that came across the border from Laos or Cambodia. Have you got any bit of a expansion on that sort of flying program.
Yeah, we after a while the alert status was reduced, but if there was anything came up, Lion would call us and we would launch a couple of aeroplanes. We normally threw 3 waves a day, starting at about 7:30 in the morning, the next one around 10:30, and the last one at 1:30. Of 3 waves of say 3 or 4 aeroplanes. There was one funny incident. A fellow named Peter Larrard. There was Lion had this unknown aircraft flying south out of Cambodia, and anyway, he had some 100-gallon drop tanks on, and he sent him down there. And it was sitting up. It was actually a U-2 belonging to Air America, and it was up at some God knows height above 60,000 feet. And Peter said, "I'll climb. I'll drop the drop tanks off, but I'll get him. I'll get him." They said, "No, come on, home you come, home you come." But no, there were quite a lot of intercepts. We were called off regular missions to say, "Look, we've got some unidentified aeroplanes or one." And mostly they were Air America aeroplanes, which were flying under Helio Couriers. They were C-46 Curtiss Commandos, light aircraft that belonged to some sort of unbeknownst organisation. Some of them were escorted into Ubon, and some of them you saw and they were just let go. But
now, what weapons were you carrying?
Well, we had basically the gun and the sidewinder.
What sort of gun?
It was the 30mm Aden cannon.
Okay.
But generally they weren't armed later on. In the times from around about early 63, the aeroplanes didn't fly around armed at all. So it was more of an intercept of presence being the deterrent. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. So later on, I believe in about 65, they started to carry live sidewinders and live ammunition.
Yes, so
Just the ones on alert.
The USAF squadrons arrived in April 65 because of the possibility of a threat to the airport, the base itself. The Americans they had 18 Phantoms there at the stage, and they were all concentrating on strikes up north, so they didn't have any resources available to sit alert and do air defence.
Yeah.
So they asked the RAAF, and it was all approved down in Canberra. We had 2 aircraft on alert, and we had live guns and live sidewinders, and they were sitting on, as I said before, on 15 alert 5 all day, and that went on for some time.
Yeah, that's interesting. So our presence was the threat rather than pulling the gun out.
Presence is deterrent rather than the threat. You know what I mean? But I guess people seem to think, well, it didn't do very much to the war effort, but nevertheless, you could look around any sort of war effort, and everything adds to the whole outcome.
It does.
You know, just not the people who shoot aeroplanes down or the guys driving the tanks. It's all the people behind them who enable them to actually do those sorts of things, and it's the whole big machine. But we had a lot of fun up there. The Americans, when they arrived with their Phantoms, most of the guys arrived and they had about 60 hours on the Phantom. Now, when you think about being thrust into a war in a Mark II aeroplane like the Phantom, they'd completed their conversions at MacDill, and they'd flown the aeroplanes over via Hawaii and into Clark and then over to Ubon. And that would have taken about 20 hours in the ferry. So they were very inexperienced guys. And as far as the air combat manoeuvres and any of the stuff they had to do up north, if they ran into MiGs, they were a little bit worried. So we had one of the guys who was a very, very capable guy named Mick Feiss, who was the fighter combat instructor. And we offered, Mick Feiss said, "Look, I'll give you a briefing, if you like, on air combat manoeuvres versus the Sabre, because the Sabre was very similar in terms of capability and turning performance of the MiG-17, which was their threat at that stage. The 21s hadn't really come on." So Mick gave them this great big detailed brief because he knew the performance of the Phantom vis-a-vis the Sabres, and he pointed out to them it's better to use their thrust to do the fight in the vertical plane, whereas we used to fight in the horizontal plane because you didn't have any thrust to go up. And they were very grateful. And as it turned out, I think it was on July the 10th or something like that. The 45th, they bagged two MiGs, and they were the first USAF MiGs in Vietnam.
And that was about 1965.
Yeah, 65 and
Yeah.
10 July 65. And the two guys that did it, the two crews, they were directed to go back to Saigon rather than come home. And when they came back to Ubon the next day, as you can imagine, they beat the living hell out of the place. And when we were talking to us, the guy later on, he said, it's the first time I've ever been kissed by a four-star general. Yeah, so they were good days. We used to have, when they came back from up north, because of they had plenty of time, plenty of fuel, and we used to meet them probably 100 miles out. And after they'd done their strikes or MiG caps up there, we used to meet them and have some air combat manoeuvres with them to sort of build on the experience level for them rather than us. And I think it paid off. Many people later on, including Robin Olds, paid compliments to 79 Squadron for
They
all
did.
the training that they helped in the air defence side of the house for the guys.
He emphasises that in some of his comments about
He
you on
does,
the
yeah, he
exercise
does.
of the
But
Aussies.
we're always jealous of the air-to-air the refueling capabilities. So one day, Bob Richards and I went up. There was a junk pile just up the road of broken aeroplanes. There was an F-105 and an F-100 and things like that. So we pinched the refueling probe off an F-100 and carried it down, and we mounted it and tied it to the undercarriage of the Sabre. And we stood in front of it and took each other's photograph, holding it there so nobody noticed. And we sent a message back down to Butterworth saying, look, we've modified one of our Sabres to do air-to-air refueling. Well, the guys in the squadron all saw the funny side of it, but one of the techos, I feel sorry for him, in 478, had no sense of humour. And he came back and he said, you can't modify aeroplanes without support command approval. And I think somebody told him and brought him out of the dark, but it was good fun. We used to get up a lot of little tricks like that.
I think it's an example of people in remote areas who find tricks to get up to because it keeps the morale up and keeps you feeling like you've got, it keeps that role in front of you. But I love the pranks that people got up to.
You get involved in some form of deployments, and yourself in Vietnam. People think it's 24 hours a day you're doing the whole thing, but there's periods of sort of, I think one of our friends who used to be flying Sabres up there at the time went on to helicopters, and he said, there are periods of interminable boredom interspersed with periods of stark terror. And I think that probably puts it quite well,
Exactly. And I believe, I'm not sure about this, but when you intercepted some of those inbound flights from Laos, Cambodia, etc., who were possibly and probably Air America, I believe you might have identified the Air America, so when you flew up close and looked in the cockpit, that the person flying the aeroplane was chewing gum.
Oh, you never know. But that's the whole thing, because they knew that they could fly around anywhere they liked, and they weren't worried about us. Sometimes we escorted them, did the old intercept thing, drop the gear and the wheels and to come into Ubon. They'd come in and land, and they'd be cleared and off they go again. And other times they just ignore and go back, do something else. But yeah, they're obviously doing things that nobody knew about. I don't think many people today even know what they got up to.
Probably not, mate. And maybe if we did know, we'd be unwise to talk about it.
Oh, that's right. It would have been sort of tongue-tied, can't tell you unless you. But no, the exercises is sort of the flying we did out of Ubon. It's quite interesting because there was no weapons work involved. We used to do a lot of air combat manoeuvring. You do, say, 2v2, 4v4, or, 2v4 and 2v6, 4v2. We used to do low-level recce reconnaissance work. Sometimes we'd go down to Karat, where later the F-105s were working up into the north, and you'd go down and fill these speed breaks with confetti and go and spread it all over the base, and they'd come back and do that sort of thing to us. So it was a sort of I won't say light-hearted, because there are times when you've got to let off a little bit of steam like that, as you
Yeah.
said before, to keep the morale going. And I'm sure that goes on in every sort of employment these days.
Yeah, it keeps you on your toes.
Oh, it does, very much so.
So, did you have any? Have you got any comments to make on infiltrators? I know that occasionally infiltrated the Ubon perimeter, and we had some Thai army or Thai military around the border, and these Thai military were having their throats cut during the night, which made us a bit nervous actually on the airfield. Did you got any comments on that?
No, that a lot of that was happened in post 60. I left in the late 65, Pete. So a
Yeah,
lot of that was in the 66, 7 and 8 period till we left. And I know, for example, I've seen photographs of Ubon with revetments where some of the aeroplanes were parked, our aircraft, and
yeah,
also with bunkers out near
yeah,
the accommodation quarters. Well, none of
yeah,
that was there in the early days at all.
yeah,
And, it really hadn't. The situation in sort of the local area hadn't deteriorated to that stage then. But the biggest threat we had were things like, there was a guy named Rex Budd who was one of the pilots, and he always had a sense of humour. And he went in town one day and he hired a young baby elephant and got the handler to bring it out, and walked it right round the base and brought it in through the mess. We all thought the building was going to collapse, but 5ACS did a good job, and this little baby elephant was only about 4 foot high at the most. He did the same thing, and before Christmas once he went into town and bought about 12 ducks, and he got the nickname Ducks Bud because he nurtured these ducks in a little pen he built near the back of the kitchen. And just before Christmas, he gave them all to the cooks, and the cooks slaughtered them. So all the people at Ubon, RAAF Ubon and RAAF contingent Ubon had lovely fresh duck for Christmas.
I love those stories. The
Yeah,
other one I heard was during that infiltration period was that when the Air Force personnel were asleep of a night, they were a bit worried that someone might sneak in the perimeter and do them damage. So they put a fence around the sleeping huts only, and they bought 6 pups, local pups from in town, put them inside the perimeter, and every day the Australian base go down and pat the dogs and make a fuss of them. And then it got to the stage where if anyone who had that different smell to us would come near the fence, these dogs would get quite noisy. And we then slept more peacefully after that, because if anyone came near our fence, infiltrators included, the dogs would go out of their brains. And it wasn't like the dogs were going to stop the infiltrator, but at least we'd wake up and maybe have a pistol under our
yeah, yeah.
under our pillow or something and defend ourselves. But I found where the hierarchy couldn't provide solutions, Australians are very good at finding solutions that work for them in all those circumstances.
Yeah, very much so. I can remember the quarters we all slept in had 2 guys to a room, and the windows were, well, put it this way, there was wire mesh with corrugated iron sort of louvers which you could put up to if it was hot or cold or things like that. And there was great palliasses, very thin, that you slept on. Well, I think some of the guys got some straw somewhere, God knows where they did, to build up that sort of thing. You know what I mean? So you had at least had a bed till the mattresses arrived a couple of years later. We had a C-130 courier come in every 2 weeks. So every Wednesday, every second Wednesday, the Herc would come up via Butterworth and deliver all the requirements, and also the changeover personnel. So
Yeah,
the guys who didn't fly up the Sabres, or the maintenance guys from 478 or the squadrons, they came up on the Herc, and that's how they did all the changeovers. Same thing for the people coming up from Australia. They were
yeah,
flown up to Butterworth first, not into Bangkok, and came up civil. I think probably COs did, but not many of the others. But initially, even the command of the whole thing, when they went up there, the CO of 77, John Hubble, was the first, and he was the OC. And later on, they had an officer commanding who was a squadron leader, but the senior guy from Butterworth went up there. He was the kingpin. So all the flight commanders in the squadrons went up there, got acting rank, and they were OC for 2 months on their rotation periods. But it was really well done and really well handled, well managed. Nobody had any complaints about the thing. We fitted in with the community quite well. We had a lot of Thai visitors come in. We worked with the Thai Air Force. They brought their airplanes up sometimes. One of them crashed on the runway doing a low pass one day. For example, there was the Thai governor came out one night with his wife, and one of the guys we had in the squadron was a fellow named Kevin Bricknell, who was an absolutely superb artist. And he'd drawn this cartoon of, it was titled Bones Outhwaite and the Rice Bowl Nine. And he had a caricature of each of the pilots and the Met Man and the senior techo and things like that. And down the bottom of the thing, he had in Thai, and he got our barman, Smithy, to put our glorious motto in, was, I hate this so-and-so place. Anyway, this particular night when the governor came out with his wife, it was a sort of I won't say formal affair because we didn't have ties, but there was cocktails and things like that. And because the Thai governor's wife couldn't speak English, she was looking around at all the local decorations that we had put on the wall of the room. And she walked over and she saw this caricature, the painting that Bricknell, or the cartoon that Brick had drawn. And she was looking, and then she read, you could see she was reading the Thai underneath. And unfortunately, you could see the flushed face. She obviously read the glorious motto. See, our barman had interpreted literally. But anyway, but that sort of thing was good. And I know the padre we used to have up there used to work very closely with the local communities and charities.
Yeah, he did. Orphanages.
Yeah, the doctors used to do the same.
Yeah.
And sort of the facilities on the base grew after a while. Initially, they used to have movie nights out the back of a truck. They had a 16 millimeter camera, so a projector mounted on the back of a truck, and that was a thing. But later they built an outdoor cinema, which was covered so you could still go there if it was raining. But it was quite a nice place. The little medical centre right next to opposite the sergeant's mess and where the officers used to live, was very capable. The doctors used to spend 6 months up there, as did initially all the base squadron guys who came up from Australia. They would come up for 6 months and then go home. Whereas the guys from Butterworth in the squadrons would go up for 2 months and then go back to Butterworth.
Yeah, and you knew constantly you're on an Air Force base because operations were 24 hours a day, particularly the Phantoms.
Yeah.
And even while you were watching movies of a night, you were reminded constantly of the effort going on with the huge amounts of noise coming into our camp because we were located right next to the runway.
That's right.
And I think that made us feel more wanted, the noise, rather than more annoyed because we could never get a decent sleep. But we felt like we were part of something that was necessary, well, not necessary to us, but part of something that was an effective operational deployment.
I think I think everybody understood it was bigger than us.
Bigger than us, yeah, much
bigger than us. We had to accept those sorts of things. They were the circumstances. And as you said, the quarters were probably no more than 300 metres, 400 metres off the runway. And when you get an F4 taking off in full afterburner, you've got about 135 decibels. So it's not exactly quiet, but with airplanes one after the other. So you're dead right. But I think everybody accepted that.
Well, it's part of what we signed up for, and
of course it is.
I know people often want to talk about military being pro-war, but I can assure everybody that anybody in the military is not pro-war. We're just performing the duty we signed up for.
No, I agree. And plus the fact most of the people are all young, Peter. We can look back today when we're in our 80s and say, oh boy, but we're all I was about 20 then and 21. So it was all a big adventure in many ways.
Exactly. I was the same thing around early 20s, 21, 22.
Yeah.
And you're given an enormous amount of responsibility with those airplanes.
Yeah. we had a pretty good safety record at Ubon. We
We
were there
did.
from 62 to 68, and we only lost two sabres. One was Don McFarlane, who had a foreign object damage in his aeroplane. He nearly made it back to Butterworth, but he ejected safely. And there was another one later on in just before we came home in 68. There was a young fellow named Mark McGrath who unfortunately stalled on base and the aeroplane crashed and he was killed. But that was a pretty good record for all that sort of time. 6 years, and it was a daily thing. He used to fly 6 days a week, so it
Yeah.
wasn't what's the name? It was pretty
Yeah.
pretty full on. But very. I look back now and say, yes, it was challenging. Yes, it was enjoyable, and yes, it was fun. It probably wasn't at the time, but now you only think of the good things. You know what I mean?
You do. But that's what keeps coming back to the front of
Yeah.
mind is the comradeship between people up there, all ranks, not just pilots, but all ranks. We had a comradeship that allowed us to be operating well above our aeroplane capacity. In other words, we could fly more hours than most people would be given credit for.
Yeah.
So there was a whole lot of memories. And right now, seeing you, for example, and talking to you, it just seems like yesterday. Now I know I'm got an older face, and you've got an older face, but still chatting, it just
Yeah.
feels like we're
No, you're right. You're right.
yesterday.
But
So
it's funny, you do remember some of the funny things, even on the social side. We used to go into town, not every night, but certainly on the
yeah,
weekends in some of the nightclubs and things like that. And you'd have a race with coming back in the Samlo, which was the guy pedaling away, and you'd be sitting in the back of it and saying, come on, faster. I remember in 64, we had a Met man by the name of Terry Lawrence, and he was coming back one night, and the Samlo was going a little bit fast and tippled over, and he fell into what we would call a money drain in Malaysia, but it was a clong in what's the name? And of course, it was about 4 foot deep. It smelt like, you know what? Poor old Terry got out and he had all this stuff dripping off. Nobody would go near him for a week, but he earned his nickname Clong Lawrence after that. But they're the funny side of that. But that adds to the whole thing. You've got the serious side. You got the part you saying about the annoyance side of the noise on takeoff with the Americans and things like that. But that's all part of the whole big picture.
So as far as the Vietnam War goes, we were forgotten in a lot of ways, but we will never forget the experiences we had together in providing a very effective force for CETO to start with, and then other agreements with the Americans after that. But I think it may have been not forgotten as a part of history, but a minor part of history when you're talking about Vietnam. But it was a very effective body that was doing the job it was sent for and getting damn good results.
And it was actually nice to be, I won't say recognised, but accepted by the Americans when they came
Yeah.
out. And they'd go up north and they'd come back and they'd come over to our mess of a night time
Yeah.
to relax initially because they didn't have one. And they wouldn't say very much, but nevertheless, you could see they were a little bit worked up as well. And their adrenaline was still pumping because they were going up there probably every second day. But there was one incident just after they came, they went up on a MiG cap and two aeroplanes were directed onto this unknown over in North Vietnam. And they found this transport aeroplane, which anyway, they had a look at it and they thought, oh, there were no markings on it. They were quite authorised to shoot anything down. Their rules of engagement were such. It was a 4-engine thing, so they let it go, came back, and their intello had nothing on it. And they came over to our blokes and we had a look, and it was a Boeing 307 of the International Control Commission. We pulled out all the sheets and showed it to them. And they said, yeah, that's it, because the ICC at the time had 3 Boeing 307s, which were 4-engine aeroplanes that looked like a 4-engine DAC, Dakotas, DC-3. And they said, that's great. But it was quite interesting, that sort of rapport that we had with the Americans. They'd come over and ask us, say, what do you know about this? What do you know about that? So we were able to get a little bit of information out of them in return, which we'd feed back into the system, But
Yeah.
also some of their aeroplanes that diverted in there, which were types that we'd never seen before, like A1 Sky Raiders, armed to the teeth with everything that you could point a stick at, and different sorts of helicopters and stuff like that. I'm talking about when the war started in North
Yeah.
Vietnam and the build up, because initially they had 18 Phantoms there from April '65 to when and when I left in the end of '65, they had 2 squadrons there, and they were building ramp as far as they're probably adding 20 meters of parking space every day. It was a huge operation, really was. And you can go on to Google Earth now and have a look at what Ubon ended up like in 1968 or even 72 when they pulled out. And it's a huge airfield. There's absolutely no relationship to what we had.
Yeah. Yeah, so there was a lot of trust, wasn't there, between both sides? In the Americans and the Australians, there's a hell of a lot of trust, which there normally is. But I think we're pretty good at building trust with other air forces, just because we have a bit of fun. We've got an open attitude, and we're very welcoming. And I think the Yanks found us, as you said, they could get away from their own very stressful operations and come over and join us on the other side and maybe have a more relaxed night.
They used to bring some of their USO people who'd come out, like Bob Hope and Martha Ray. I remember they brought Martha Ray over our club one day. We're sitting there at the bar and in walks Martha Ray. Now, a lot of people won't know who Martha Ray was, but she was a singer,
Yeah.
And Bob Hope, and those sorts of things used to happen because I think it was a lot of mutual respect between ourselves and the Air Force, the USAF. It was good.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's lovely. I enjoyed that 30 or 40 minutes with you. So thanks very much, and I'll catch up with you another time for sure.
All right. Thanks, Pete. I enjoyed it.
If you've enjoyed this chat, then please subscribe to our channel. Our channel supports veterans directly and indirectly. We are all volunteers. Additionally, if you go to the description of this particular video, you'll see links to the Australian Military Aviation History Association and links to Air Force Association New South Wales, and you'll see the subscription button to subscribe to our premium aviation magazine.